Marcus Reed felt the hospital doors close behind him like a hell breath. The afternoon sun flashed off the glass, sharp and unforgiving, and for a moment he stood still, letting the antiseptic smell fade from his clothes. Inside, his mother slept under careful watch. Outside, the world waited. "Hey, you, stop." The command cracked across the parking lot. Marcus turned to see a patrol car angled at the curb, engine idling, authority humming beneath the hood. The officer stepped out slowly, hand resting near his belt, eyes hidden behind mirrored lenses. Marcus adjusted his jacket and kept his hands visible, the old reflex already awake. "Where'd you get that badge?" the officer asked. "It's mine," Marcus said. His voice sounded steady, even to him. The officer laughed once, short and dismissive. "Sure it is." A stroller squeaked somewhere. Tires whispered against asphalt. Marcus felt every eye slide toward him, felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the question that never needed to be asked out loud. He reached for his pocket, slow, careful. The officer's hand snapped up. "Don't." Time tightened. Marcus tasted metal at the back of his tongue, remembered his father's warning, his mother's tired smile. He lowered his hand. "You don't belong here," the officer said, quiet enough to cut deeper. The words echoed louder than the traffic, louder than the hospital alarms drifting through the glass. Marcus looked past the officer, back at the building that carried his family's name on one wing and his future in its walls. "Turn around," the officer said, pulling out the cuffs. The metal clicked open, and Marcus realized, too late, that this moment was about to decide everything. Marcus Reed stepped out of Satan's medical center into the brittle afternoon light, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to his jacket. The sliding doors sighed shut behind him. Somewhere inside, machines beeped and nurses moved with practiced calm. He paused, pressing a hand to his ribs, and breathed through the ache that had followed him since dawn. "Sir, hey, you in the gray jacket." The voice cut across the parking lot. Marcus turned. A patrol car idled near the curb, blue and white paint glaring in the sun. The officer leaned out of the window, mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Where you headed?" "My car," Marcus replied, nodding toward the employee lot. The officer frowned. "That lot's restricted." "I know. I have a badge." Marcus reached into his pocket slowly, careful, the way his mother had taught him. The officer's door opened anyway. Boots hit pavement. "Hands where I can see them," the officer said. Marcus froze. "Officer, I'm leaving a hospital. I just—" "Hands," the officer repeated, voice flat. A woman pushing a stroller slowed nearby. Two orderlies stopped talking. Marcus lifted his palms. His heart thudded loud enough to drown the traffic. "What's your name?" the officer asked. "Marcus Reed." "Reason for being here?" "I had meetings and a patient check-in." The officer snorted. "Patient? Holy! That's not what I said." The officer stepped closer. "You match a description." "Of who?" "Don't get smart." "I'm not," Marcus said quietly. "I'm tired." The officer's radio crackled. "Unit 12, status." "Occupied," the officer said, eyes never leaving Marcus. "Running ID." "You haven't asked for my ID," Marcus said. The officer smiled thinly. "I'm about to." Marcus felt the old heat rise in his chest, the familiar mix of anger and caution. He thought of his father's hand shaking after a traffic stop years ago. He thought of the donor wing upstairs, named after his mother, still asleep after surgery. "Sir," Marcus said, steadying his voice, "is there a problem?" The officer leaned in close. "The problem is you don't look like you belong here." The words landed heavy. The parking lot seemed to hold its breath. Marcus swallowed, eyes flicking to the hospital sign, to the glass reflecting his own face. "Turn around," the officer said, reaching for his cuffs. Marcus hesitated for half a second. Then sirens wailed somewhere distant, and the officer's hand closed around his wrist. He tried to pull back. "Wait! There's cameras. Inside. Call your supervisor." "Stop resisting," the officer said, louder now. "I'm not resisting." "Turn. Around." Metal bit into Marcus's skin. A security guard took a step forward, then stopped when the officer glanced his way. Someone lifted a phone. Another person looked away. "Please," Marcus said. "Check my badge." "Too late," the officer said. "You can explain downtown." Marcus felt the cold settle behind his eyes. He thought of the board meeting scheduled in an hour. He thought of the ICU nurse who had thanked him that morning. He thought of his mother, pale against white sheets. A second patrol car rolled in, tires crunching. The newcomer watched, said nothing. Unit 12, the radio crackled again. Supervisor en route. The officer tightened the cuffs. "Good." Marcus swallowed. "You're making a mistake." The officer leaned close, breath sharp with coffee. "You people always say that." The doors of the hospital slid open. A surgeon in scrubs stared, recognition dawning, then confusion. Marcus met her eyes and shook his head once. The officer pushed him toward the car. The trunk reflected the hospital's name in warped chrome. St. Anne's. Marcus breathed, counting. Somewhere upstairs, a monitor alarmed. The officer opened the back door. "Get in," the officer said. Marcus ducked into the seat. The door slammed. The sound echoed like a verdict. Through the window, the hospital loomed, glass and light and promise. Marcus closed his eyes as the engine started, not knowing which would hurt more, what came next, or who would see. Above them, a banner fluttered for Saint and Foundation Gala, tomorrow night, his signature printed beneath the donors list, the ink still fresh, the truth still invisible. Nobody read it yet, and nobody stopped the car there. The precinct smelled of stale coffee and bleach. Marcus Reed's hands were cuffed to the cold metal bench as the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The walls were a muted gray, the kind that seemed to swallow hope whole. Officer Daniel Harlan leaned against the counter, smirking at the clock while the night shift scrolled through paperwork. "Name?" the booking officer asked, flipping through a ledger. Marcus repeated it slowly, each syllable measured. He had learned to control the tremor in his voice, the way fear licked at the edges of his words. "Address?" "I live downtown," Marcus said. He gave the street and apartment number. Every word felt like a trap. "You have any weapons?" "No," Marcus replied. His badge rested in his jacket pocket, hidden but tangible. He had thought of flashing it, just once, but the moment had passed. Harlan had already claimed the power. The booking process dragged on. Fingerprints, photographs, electronic signatures. Each click of a camera shutter a reminder that the system had the upper hand. Marcus tried to keep his breathing shallow, to not let the panic rise, even as other detainees muttered complaints, shouted at walls, or offered him furtive glances. "Board meeting today," one of the other men asked, voice low. "Something like that," Marcus said. A public defender arrived late, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "Mr. Reed, the best advice I can give is stay calm. Don't say anything else until we talk." Marcus nodded. "Thank you." He leaned back against the wall, feeling the hard surface press against his shoulder blades. Outside, the sun had faded, leaving the lot in orange twilight. Meanwhile, back at St. Anne's, whispers began. Security footage showed a man being cuffed. Nurses paused, murmuring to one another. Hospital administration scrambled to identify him. Someone mentioned the board member's absence. The name Marcus Reed surfaced. Harlan stood by the doorway, arms crossed, radio crackling. "Unit 12, report complete. Downtown transport ready." His voice carried casual finality. He didn't know that he had just detained the owner. Marcus's mind drifted. His mother, recovering upstairs. The gala scheduled for tomorrow night. The staff who trusted him. Each image was a tiny flame, flickering in the gray of the precinct. His hands itched inside the cuffs, and he pressed them together in silent defiance. Hours passed. Interviews began. Marcus answered questions without elaboration, correcting misstatements politely but firmly. The detectives prodded, suggesting he had resisted or lied. He repeated the truth. "You were compliant," one detective said finally. "Just unlucky timing." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Unlucky? My mother is in intensive care." The detective shrugged. "Procedures happen." Officer Harlan followed protocol. The words landed heavy. Marcus realized that compliance wasn't protection here. The system wasn't built for people like him. He felt anger coil in his chest, tight and dangerous, tempered only by exhaustion. By nightfall, the precinct buzzed with quiet whispers about the incident. Phones rang in muted urgency. Somewhere, someone noticed the name Marcus Reed again. Somewhere, the first cracks in Harlan's authority began to form. The officer finally turned to him, voice casual. "Don't worry. Your loyal sorted." Marcus kept his gaze steady. "I don't need sorting," he said softly. "I need acknowledgement." Harlan blinked, nonplussed, and walked away. Marcus leaned back against the bench, counting the minutes, the hours, the breaths. Outside, the city lights blurred through the grimy windows. The hospital waited, and tomorrow the world would start to notice. Daniel Harlan sat at his desk, feet propped on the chipped laminate surface, coffee cooling in a styrofoam cup. His gaze rested on the spreadsheet of daily stops and complaints. One name glowed in bold, Marcus Reed. He scrolled past it quickly, hoping no one noticed a red flag. Another day, another problem, he muttered, rubbing his temples. A sergeant poked her head in. "Harlan, you okay?" "Fine," he said, forcing a grin. "Just paperwork." She didn't press. Most didn't. Harlan had a reputation. Smooth, intimidating, untouchable. Complaints existed, stacked in folders, buried under protocol. Unfounded was a label that followed him like a shadow. He remembered the parking lot. The way Reed had kept his hands visible. The calm, measured tone. Harlan felt a twist in his chest, irritation wrapped in authority. He knew the rules, he muttered aloud. Too smart for his own good. A call buzzed on the radio. Another routine patrol. He ignored it, staring at the footage of Reed leaving the hospital. His reflection in the monitor stared back, a man convinced of his righteousness. Harlan's partner wondered in. "That guy, you sure about to stop?" Harlan shrugged. His suspicious. Didn't matter if he was polite. "Don't get soft." "Soft?" the partner said. His someone important, apparently. Harlan waved him off. Important or not, procedure's procedure. The day stretched. Reports were filed, complaints skimmed, and Harlan's ego remained intact. Internal affairs existed, but rarely touched officers like him. Supervisors smiled politely when he passed by, praising efficiency while ignoring the whispers behind closed doors. At lunch, he recounted the stop to another officer in the break room. He had a badge, Harlan said, smirking. Tried to play smart. Thought it'd save him. "Did it?" someone asked. Harlan laughed. "No, not at all. Some people always think rules don't apply to them." The words felt good, familiar, protective. They reaffirmed a worldview Harlan had built over years. Authority unquestionable, compliance the only measure of obedience. By evening, the precinct hum had quieted. Harlan stared out the window at the city lights. Somewhere, Reed sat cuffed, watching hours bleed into night. Harlan didn't know his name yet, didn't know the stakes, didn't consider the hospital's board meetings or the community watching silently. He only knew control, and that he had it. And in that quiet, he didn't realize how quickly the foundations beneath him were beginning to crack. Back at St. Anne's, the morning hum of hospital life carried on as usual, but whispers began to ripple through the hallways. Marcus Reed's absence was noticed first by Dr. Karen Whitman, the lead surgeon in the ICU. She paused mid-shot, squinting at the sign-in sheet. "Where's Marcus?" she asked the nurse, voice low but urgent. The nurse shrugged, tapping her badge against the desk. "He left after checking on his mother." "Security footage shows." She froze. "Wait!" Whitman moved toward the monitor, heart thudding. Security footage revealed Marcus being led from the parking lot in handcuffs, officers firm but unsuspicious of the irony. Recognition sparked. She knew the man, the philanthropist, the name printed across the donor plaque in the oncology wing. She tapped another nurse. "Call hospital security, now, and notify the director." By mid-morning, administrators scrambled. Emails flew, phones buzzed relentlessly. Marcus Reed, the board member, part owner, man whose investment had funded wings of the hospital, was in custody. The news hit like a shockwave, reverberating from office to floor, cafeteria to patient rooms. Marcus sat in the transport van, wrists aching from the cuffs, watching the hospital fade behind him. He caught snippets of sirens, cell phones snapping pictures, voices whispering his name. He had thought authority was a shield in his life. Now he saw how fragile it could be. Meanwhile, hospital leadership converged, piecing together the images, confirming names, tallying responsibilities. Security footage had captured Harlan's insistence, his dismissal of Reed's explanations, the casual aggression. The truth began to leak through the cracks of protocol. Dr. Whitman's voice trembled when she spoke to the director. He's the owner. He owns this hospital. That man being arrested, that's Marcus Reed. Phones clicked. Screens brightened. Administrators paused, stomachs sinking. Harlan remained unaware that the walls he relied on for authority were no longer neutral. Inside the van, Marcus sensed a shift, even without words. The officers were still acting in routine, unaware of the storm about to descend. His hands itched again, not from the cuffs, but from the knowledge that recognition could alter everything. By the time the van pulled into the city lot, whispers had become calls had become emails, and emails had become the first tremors of exposure. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes, counting breaths. The name on the wall above the oncology wing, once a quiet honor, now carried a weight far heavier than he had anticipated. And somewhere in the precinct, Harlan's confidence remained unshaken, oblivious to the wave rising just out of sight, one that threatened to dismantle everything he thought untouchable. The moment the bodycam footage leaked, the world shifted. Marcus Reed's arrest, once a private humiliation, became public spectacle. Screens in hospital lounges, coffee shops, and living rooms across the city showed Officer Daniel Harlan's make, his hand gripping Marcus's wrist as he barked commands. Every viewer saw the dismissal of compliance, the sharpness in Harlan's tone, the subtle menace in his posture. Marcus sat in a small office at his lawyer's firm, wrists still tender from the cuffs, eyes fixed on the laptop screen. The footage played on a loop. Each replay brought the same surge of disbelief, anger, and something colder, the realization of how systemic this was. "They're going to see," his lawyer said, voice low but firm. "People are already talking. The press, local first, then national. They'll see what happened." Marcus nodded, voice tight. "And Harlan, they'll see him too." Back at the precinct, Harlan had no idea his professional world was crumbling. Supervisors scrambled, trying to spin the story as routine, calling internal affairs to review procedures. But the public didn't wait. Tweets, Facebook posts, and Instagram stories painted a clear picture. A black man, detained outside a hospital he owned, humiliated in front of bystanders. The hospital responded cautiously. A statement was drafted, approved, and leaked to select media outlets. "We are aware of an incident involving one of our board members. We are investigating." Marcus's lawyer frowned. Careful, they want to control the narrative. Marcus's phone buzzed endlessly. Family and friends sent messages, offering support. Colleagues called, some shaking with disbelief, others furious at the injustice. Marcus read each one, his heart heavy. Recognition brought relief, but relief mingled with frustration. Justice had yet to arrive, and exposure alone would not undo trauma. By afternoon, Harlan was receiving calls from internal affairs, inquiries that felt like the first pricks of accountability. His commanding officer frowned, leafing through the leaked footage, voice low. "Daniel, we need a statement." Harlan's smirk faltered. "I follow procedure," he said, tone defensive but uncertain. Meanwhile, Marcus's release was imminent. The cuffs clicked open, and he rubbed his wrists, flexing fingers as if to reclaim his body. Outside, the city had changed overnight. The streets felt different, aware. Cars slowed. People whispered. Phones lifted discreetly to record. Marcus's mother remained in ICU, oblivious to the viral storm her son had just endured. Stepping out of the building, Marcus inhaled deep, tasting the cold air, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon him. Harlan's patrol car waited, now a symbol of an authority suddenly under scrutiny. Marcus's gaze met the officer's. Harlan's confidence wavered, the first real crack in his armor. Marcus smiled faintly, bitter and measured. "This ends differently," he said softly. The words weren't for Harlan alone. They were a promise to himself. A camera shutter clicked nearby. The moment was captured. Exposure had begun. And justice, slow, meticulous, and inevitable, was already in motion. Marcus Reed stepped back into St. Anne's Medical Center, the fluorescent lights no longer comforting but stark, almost accusing. The hospital felt different. Every corridor seemed to hold whispers. Every nurse and orderly's glance carried the weight of what had been broadcast worldwide. He was free, but freedom now had a cost. Constant observation, scrutiny, and the knowledge that every move he made was a statement. "Mr. Reed," the hospital director said, hurrying down the hall. We had no idea." His words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Marcus met him with steady eyes. "Unaware doesn't excuse it," Marcus said, voice low but cutting. "Security footage is clear. He didn't ask. He didn't verify. He humiliated me publicly." The director swallowed. "We're reviewing policies." "We'll." "Policies don't protect against prejudice," Marcus interrupted. He paused, letting the words sink. "They protect the institution, not the people inside it." Outside the hospital, the media had arrived. Cameras and microphones crowded the entrance, reporters eager to speak with a man who had been wronged. Marcus stayed behind the hospital's glass doors, listening to the murmurs, the flashes, the repeated name, Marcus Reed. His lawyer joined him, handing a folder of documents. "They are offering a settlement. City officials want to avoid litigation." Marcus shook his head. "Not enough. It's not just about money. It's about exposure, accountability, systemic change." Meanwhile, Officer Harlan faced mounting pressure. Call from internal affairs multiplied. Supervisors demanded explanations. Even his peers, the ones who had once laughed at his arrogance, now looked uneasy. Whispers in the precinct no longer reassured him. They isolated him. Community leaders rallied. Local activists issued statements. Social media buzzed with outrage, dissecting every frame of the body cam footage, every word Harlan had uttered. Marcus watched from a distance, aware that public attention was a tool and a weapon. Inside, Marcus also grappled with the emotional toll. His mother was recovering slowly, but the fear and helplessness he'd felt outside her room lingered. Nights were restless, haunted by the image of cuffs biting into his wrists. Harlan smirked, the stares of strangers. Anger simmered alongside exhaustion, an undercurrent he could not ignore. The city offered pressure, the hospital demanded diplomacy, and Harlan felt the walls of authority closing in. Marcus realized the truth. Justice required persistence, patience, and the courage to bear exposure, even as the system resisted. By evening, Marcus sat in his office at the hospital, watching news coverage, reading comments, and feeling the first glimmer of agency. The story was no longer just about him. It was about patterns, systemic bias, and a call for accountability that could not be silenced. The hearing room smelled of polished wood and tension. Marcus Reed sat at the plaintiff's table, posture rigid but composed. Across from him, Officer Daniel Harlan shifted uncomfortably in his uniform, the badges and medals on his chest suddenly feeling hollow. This was no parking lot, no casual stop. This was public scrutiny in its most unforgiving form. The hearing began with procedural formalities. Lawyers, witnesses, and administrators filed in, their footsteps echoing on the cold tile. Marcus's lawyer opened with a measured statement. "Today, we examine not just an incident, but a pattern, an abuse of power, a violation of rights, and a failure to uphold justice." Harlan's attorney countered, voice clipped. "Officer Harlan followed established protocol. Any claim of misconduct is unsubstantiated." Marcus listened, noting the confidence in the denial and the subtle smirks exchanged between officers in the room. He felt the old weight, the expectation to remain invisible, unheard, but he refused it now. Witnesses testified. Bystanders recounted the parking lot encounter. Security footage played on large screens. Each replay highlighted Harlan's dismissive tone, the unnecessary tension, the racialized assumptions. Gasps occasionally punctuated the room. The hospital's administrator spoke next, acknowledging the error in identification and the oversight in security. They emphasized changes already underway in response to the incident. Finally, Marcus had the floor. He described the moment outside the hospital, the fear, the humiliation, the knowledge that authority had been wielded as a weapon. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of personal experience and systemic truth. "You're accountable for your actions," he said, locking eyes with Harlan. "Privilege does not excuse bias. Compliance does not justify abuse. And the law does not bend for assumptions." Harlan shifted, the first visible crack in his armor. The room remained silent, tension palpable, as the officers, lawyers, and observers absorbed the force of Marcus's testimony. Outside, news crews captured the hearing live, projecting the story across the city. By the end of the day, evidence had been laid bare, witnesses corroborated accounts, and the scales of authority tilted. Harlan no longer had the comfort of doubt, and Marcus understood that justice required patience, persistence, and unwavering resolve. 2 weeks later, the precinct felt different. Officer Daniel Harlan no longer walked the halls with the same ease. The internal affairs investigation had escalated. Supervisors no longer offered quiet smiles of approval. Harlan's name was on every memo. Every complaint he had ever brushed aside resurfaced. The culture that once protected him had begun to crumble. The city announced his termination publicly. Legal proceedings were pending, and civil suits loomed. Harlan's peers avoided eye contact. Whispers followed him like shadows. For the first time, authority felt fragile, and he experienced a taste of accountability he had long denied others. Marcus Reed, meanwhile, returned to St. Anne's with a mixture of relief and residual tension. The hospital board implemented sweeping security reforms, diversity training, and new protocol for patient and visitor identification. Marcus's name appeared in news headlines, not as a victim alone, but as an advocate for justice and systemic change. Yet even as a victory settled, the emotional cost remained. Marcus found himself replaying the parking lot, the cuffs, the smirk that had haunted him. Nights were restless, and conversations with his mother included moments of pause and reflection, the trauma unspoken but deeply felt. Still, he persisted. He attended meetings, oversaw operations, and spoke publicly about bias, accountability, and reform. The city began to notice. The community applauded, and the hospital staff expressed cautious hope. Marcus knew the road ahead would not be free of friction, but the balance had shifted. Harlan faced public disgrace, pending charges, and a reputation in ruins, while Marcus reclaimed agency over his life, his work, and the institution that bore his family's name. Justice had arrived, but it came tempered with the weight of personal cost and the vigilance required to maintain it. Months had passed since the incident, yet the echoes of that day lingered in Marcus Reed's mind. Walking through St. Anne's Medical Center felt familiar and alien at the same time. The halls were polished, bustling, and efficient, but he noticed the subtle shifts. Staff greeting him with genuine warmth rather than cautious curiosity, security procedures strengthened, cameras and badges recalibrated for fairness. Change had begun. Marcus often paused near the donor plaques in the oncology wing, tracing his mother's name engraved in polished metal. He remembered the fear, the humiliation, the tight metal cuff pressing into his wrist, and he allowed himself a brief exhale. Survival did not erase trauma. Recognition did not erase the sting of systemic injustice. He held private meetings with hospital administrators, advocating for continued vigilance, bias training, and community outreach. Marcus understood the fragility of progress. System could revert, power could corrupt, and complacency could undo months of effort. His advocacy was measured, deliberate, relentless. Outside, Officer Daniel Harlan faced legal consequences, termination, and public shame. He disappeared from precinct circles, his authority dismantled, yet the ripple of damage he caused persisted. Marcus recognized that justice was multifaceted. Some wounds healed quickly, others lingered in memory, in culture, in institutions. At home, Marcus spoke with his mother, sharing quiet moments that needed no words. He reflected on the balance between personal resilience and collective responsibility. Healing was uneven, progress incremental, but he had endured, had reclaimed agency, and had set precedent. Marcus walked through the hospital corridors one evening, lights glowing softly against the evening sky. He paused, looking at the bustling staff, the patients, the life inside the walls he now safeguarded. The city outside hummed with constant energy, justice and injustice intertwined, but he had reclaimed his space. The battle had been fought, lessons engraved in memory, and Marcus Reed carried forward with quiet strength, aware that vigilance, courage, and dignity were the true victories in a world still learning to see.